False dichotomy. In a false dichotomy, two mutually exclusive options are set up as the only possible choices. Therefore, if one is true, the other must be untrue. The fallacy is that the options may not be mutually exclusive, or even related, and other choices may exist. Venom Fang X walks us through the classic evolution versus religion false dichotomy. And I vote this kid is 5-star creepy.
Some people might say that maybe God used evolution to get us here. Well, that's not the God of the Bible, because the God of the Bible says that death came by man's sin. However, evolution says man came by death. Quite opposites. There's a stark contrast between the two, and only one is right, because they are diametrically opposites. In fact, that's proof in the Bible's favor, because if you take it at face value, it is a literal opposite of evolution in every way. In fact, you could come to the theory of evolution by simply looking at what the Bible says and then flipping it on its head.
And half the people, roughly, question evolution and think that some other theory, creationism, is just as likely to be true. So science gets better and better and better, while the person in the street doesn't seem to accept what scientists conclude. And there's the gap. That is a gap, and that gap is getting bigger, and it's very frightening. Because I think a society that turns its back on reason and prefers ideology is headed toward some kind of theocracy.
Begging the question. Also known as circular reasoning, begging the question is a fallacy where your conclusion is implicitly or explicitly assumed in your premise. Therefore, the illusion of logic is presented when in fact no proof has been made. Begging the question can be very subtly done. In the next clip, notice how the questioner assumes somebody wound up the universe.
NASA scientist Robert Jastrow wrote, "The second law of thermodynamics applied to the cosmos indicates the universe is running down like a clock. If it is running down, there must have been a time when it was fully wound up. The next obvious question is, who wound it up?"
As long as carbon dating aligns with other forms of dating, until it does something wacky, you know, if it's going with the strata, if we're digging down in archaeology and we're looking at different, if a geologist is saying this layer happened here, this layer happened here, and then you find something and you carbon date it from that layer and it matches, I mean, it's just like, well, if you have other ways of dating things, then you get an idea if one method of dating is not reliable.
Tautology. A specialized form of begging the question, a tautology, occurs when the premise and conclusion of an argument are identical. While a tautology, like A equals A, is true, and the repeated statement may also be true, a tautology proves nothing outside of itself. The anthropic principle is a tautology leading to a false dichotomy. In the following clip, notice how the setup for the anthropic principle can be boiled down to, if things were different, then things would be different.
For example, if you didn't have something like gravity that pulled matter together, you would never get planets, you wouldn't get stars, you wouldn't get any complex organisms. If you didn't have the strong nuclear force, there would be nothing to hold protons and neutrons together in the nucleus. And so you wouldn't have any atoms, so no chemistry. If you didn't have the electromagnetic force, you would have no bonding between chemicals. You'd have no light, and the list goes on. So you need all these sorts of fundamental principles have to be in place in order for life to occur. Wipe out one of those principles, wipe out one of those laws, no life.
Mutations are a very important concept in biology. They're the process by which new genes can be created, creating new opportunities for evolution to occur. But your cell is really good at catching any errors, and in fact, you only have, out of every billion nucleotides, you only get one error sneaking in. So you're much bigger now. You've copied your DNA a whole bunch more times. And that's one of the reasons why, as people age, the chances of getting certain cancers, etc., increases because there's just accumulated genetic damage.
False premise. In a false premise fallacy, the conclusion of an argument is invalidated by an incorrect assumption in one of the premises. You can't build a house on a poor foundation. Foundational biases and ad hoc reasoning usually have a false premise at their base. Many false premises exist in creationist arguments, like a global flood occurred, evolution is incorrect, etc. But the most formalized example is the Kalam cosmological argument. The false premise is that the universe began to exist. We have no proof that the universe ever not existed.
It is called the Kalam cosmological argument.
The Kalam argument is deceptively simple in its formulation. It consists of basically 3 steps. Premise 1 is that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Something cannot come into being uncaused out of absolutely nothing. Premise 2 is that the universe began to exist. And the remarkable development that has occurred is that for the first time, we now have solid scientific evidence for the truth of that second premise, that the universe began to exist. And from those 2 premises, it follows logically, therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause of its existence.
Is that the so-called evidence against evolution is not evidence. It's nonsense.
Ad hoc reasoning. Ad hoc reasoning, meaning for this purpose, is done to salvage an argument that rests upon a shaky foundation. Ad hoc reasoning attempts to address unstable or invalid portions of a failed argument. It is often used to avoid re-evaluation of an argument's validity. Kent Hovind is the master of ad hoc reasoning. Of course, his ad hoc reasoning needs its own ad hoc reasoning, but that's part of the beauty. Listen to him try to explain the firmament.
Now, this is what is known as the canopy theory. I cannot prove this. I can just tell you what the Bible says. There was water above the atmosphere, and I'm going to believe the Bible until it's proven wrong. Okay? And I can't tell you what it was or how it was held up there. Some people think it was ice, and it was held up by the magnetic field of the Earth. Suspended, what's called the Meissner effect. You know, a magnet will float on top of another magnet. I don't know. Somehow there was water up there.
When you see the really quite complicated things that you often do see in biological organisms, many Americans just sort of naturally say, oh, well, of course, there's no way to explain that by random chance processes. And every evolutionary biologist would agree with you that something like a bacteria flagellum could not possibly have been assembled by random amino acids or proteins falling together to form this functioning structure. Everyone would agree with that. The error lies much deeper. The error lies in equating any natural process with chance. And of course, Charles Darwin's great discovery was that the process of natural selection is a natural process that generates complex structures. It is a natural process, but it is not a chance process. Don't ever let anybody ever tell you natural selection is a chance process. It isn't. It's adaptive differential reproduction, and you can ask your biology professor what that means, because I don't have time to talk about everything.